Hello there, my lovely jewelry makers. I'm Christina of CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make these Eternal Waves Wirework Bracelets. And they have this really elegant wave effect to them because of the technique we're using. Now if you like any of the bracelets from the video here specifically, they will be for sale in my shop along with other jewelry kits and tutorials. You can find them below the video, and if you want to support me in a different way so I can continue making these tutorials for you, you can always like, share and subscribe, and there's also a super thanks button down below. But if you want to learn how you can make this bracelet for yourself, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we're going to need. The wire I'm using is a regular round silver coated copper wire, and the first gauge here is a 1.25mm, and that's going to be the base wire and the strength of the piece. Now you can also replace this with a 1mm, and next we're going to need a 0.6mm, and this is going to be for the wavy effect. Then the beads we're going to need are these 6mm rounds, and I'm using some purple agate gemstone beads, but of course you can choose whatever you want to. You just need to make sure the holes are large enough to take the 1.25mm through, or if you find that to be a struggle, that's where you could also swap it out for a 1mm wire. Now of course we need some findings to finish off the bracelet with as well, so I'm using a lobster claw clasp and extender chain and a couple of jump rings to put it all together. And then of course we need a few tools as well, so I've got my flush cutters here so we can cut our wire, tweezer nose pliers to help manipulate the wire, and then I'm using some 6-step bell making pliers for any loops we need to make, but you can of course use round nose pliers for this. And like always, you'll be able to find the material list and useful links in the description box down below. Otherwise, let's get it all ready and let's get started. So then we need to cut some lengths of our wire, and first of all I have a length of about 35 centimeters of the 1.25mm wire, or the 1mm if that's what you're using. And then we need 6 lengths of a 0.6mm here of about 50 centimeters each. Now you can easily use more or less wires, that all depends on the look that you want. So the first thing we need to do is grab our base wire here, and then we take our other lengths of wires and we need to attach all of them to the base wire. So I'm just going to do one at a time, and I'm going to start about 5 centimeters or so from the end of the base wire, and you can just leave a short tail of your 0.6mm in this case. Then all I'm going to do is wrap this around, and I want to wrap it around a couple of times. Now it's up to you how many times you do that as well. So I've done it twice, and I'm just going to do it once more and make sure my wraps are nice and tight. And then we have this first length attached. I'm then going to grab my next length and basically do the exact same thing, but just right next to the first one. So just leave a short little tail to hold on to. Attach this by wrapping it around a couple of times. And I'm just going to do the same amount of times as I did previously. And then we can just push that down to sit right next to the other one. And you basically just want to attach all the wires in this way until they're all sitting right next to each other. So now I've got all my wires attached here, and you just want to make sure they're nice and smoothed out as well, so we don't have any kinks around here especially. Then what I'm going to do is take my first bead and add that onto the end of the base wire, and then let it drop all the way down to where my wires are and sit right after them. And then I'm going to hold on to everything here and then just start to push my wire, so the bead is going to end up sitting at more of an angle next to where the wires are, something a bit like that. And then we need to bring the rest of the wire here on the other side of the bead a bit further as well. So we're basically creating a little wave shape in the wire with the bead in the middle there. And then from here we then need to start bringing all these lengths of wire to the other side of the bead and creating that wave effect. And what you just want to do is pay attention to the direction that the wires are coming over or under the base wire. So all of these lengths are coming from underneath. That means once I bring them over to the other length, we need to come over the top. So we're going from under to over. Now what I'm going to do is start with the very first length that we attached, so the one that's furthest away from the bead. And I'm just going to make sure that it's smoothed out nicely and kind of have a bit of a curve in there, and start to bring it around down towards the bead and end up sitting right next to the bead there. And you just want to make sure you have a bit of a curve from where it's coming from. We get a nice shape in place, and then you can hold everything in place while you then wrap this length around the base wire on the other side of the bead to fasten it in place. Now that was once, and then I'm going to wrap it twice. And in this case, because I wrapped all these wires on here 3 times, I'm going to continue with that number. So whenever I'm wrapping my wires here, I'm going to do it 3 times, and then have it come away from everything else. Now if you choose to wrap only twice, for instance, I would then say continue doing 2 wraps every time, but again that's completely up to you and how you want yours to look. Doing 3 wraps, say instead of 2, will create a little bit more spacing and make it more open in the effect. So that all depends on what you want for yours. Now after here, I'm going to take the very next wire in line, so the one that's right next to the one we just used, moving our way in towards the bead. And then again, just smooth that out. And as I'm bringing it over the top of the base wire, I'm just going to make sure there's a bit of a curve in it, just like that first one, and have it sit at about the same level. And then when you're happy with where it sits, hold it in place and then start to wrap this around. So we fasten it. So that was once and then twice, and then again I'm going to do it a third time. So I make the same amount of wraps on all of them. And then just make sure it's pushed down nice and tight next to the other one. Then I'm going to grab the very next wire in line, moving our way towards the bead, making sure it's nice and smooth, and then bring it over to the other side of the bead. And once we're happy with that, then wrap it around the base wire, again 3 times in this case. And also just keep making sure that your wraps on this side here are pushed nice and close together. Then I'm grabbing the very next one in line. So I'm halfway through my lengths of wire now. So obviously that's because I'm using 6 lengths. Like I said, you can use more or less, but same principle. Bring that around and over the top of the base wire. Make sure it has a curve in it, and then start to wrap it around the same amount of times. Have that come out in the same direction as all the others we've done. You can see we're then kind of creating this effect in the middle. It's going to end up being the wavy effect. And the next one in line, same thing. Make sure we get a curve in it. Bring it around the base wire on the other side. And I'm doing the 3 wraps. And then we have 1 length left. Same principle, make sure to smooth it out. And then this one is the one that's right next to the bead, but on the other side here of the bead is going to be the furthest away from the same bead. But again, make sure we add a curve as we're bringing it over that base wire to then be able to wrap it around the same amount of times as the other ones. So I now have all these lengths of wires pointing out in the same direction away from what we've just done, and they're basically ready and in position for the next section. Now I suggest before we go on to making that section, you just want to take the opportunity while it's still a bit free here and just smooth out these lengths of wires on the other side so they're ready and nice and smooth and free of any possible kinks before we then start using them. But then what we need to do before we move them any further is add another bead to our base wire. So just let that go all the way down. So you can just also hold and rotate your piece however you need to. So if you imagine the length is going to continue this way, so that's how we're going to be building it, which means that we need to bring this wire back in the opposite direction again. So we need to repeat what we did with the first bead. So I'm going to hold on to everything where my wires are and then just bend this base wire a bit towards the opposite direction so the bead sits in the same direction as the other one, but obviously further up and on the other side. But just imagine we're going to have the bracelet going up in a straight line like this, so we can basically use the previous beads to see how we need the new one to sit. So it's going to be nice like this. I'm going to then make sure the bead stays in place and then keep pushing the wire up a bit more and get it at about the same angle as we did the first one. So this is now a new kind of wave shape we're going to make, but going in the opposite direction. And it's going to be the same principle. The difference now is that in this case here, our wires are coming out from over the top of the base wire, which means that when I pick out my first one here, which is the one furthest away from the new bead, I'm going to now bring it underneath the base wire on the other side of the bead. So I'm always going opposite to where it's coming from on the previous wrap. And again, you can then use the previous sections of your bracelet to kind of judge where you want your curves to be on these wires as well. So make sure you have that curve and then bring it around your base wire on the other side of the bead. And this was furthest away from this new bead, but it's now going to be the closest to that bead on the other side. And I'm going to continue doing my 3 wraps. So that's twice and then 1 final one. Make sure they're nice and tight. And again, this one is going to come out straight out in the opposite direction to where it's coming from. So that's the first wire. Then I'm going to take the next one, which is the one right next to it. And again, that's coming over from the previous wrap. So we need to bring it underneath the next base wire. And then just get that curve in there. Hold everything in place while I then wrap it around this base wire. In my case, 3 times like that, and make sure to push all your wraps nice and tight together. So I've now done 2 lengths here on this side of the bead. Then I'm going to take the very next length, and we're just going to keep repeating this. So basically the same principle as I showed you on the previous section. We're now just coming from over and going under because we're doing opposite, but just make sure to get those curves in place and do your wraps until you used all the lengths in this section as well. And then it'll look a little something like this when you've done all the lengths here. Now this is in the position where we need to add our next bead, and I'm gonna again just add that to the end of the base wire and let it drop all the way down. And just like the other times, I'm keeping hold of all the wires that are just wrapped. Make sure the bead is pushed down, and then just first of all kind of straighten the bead out. And again, like I mentioned, you can use the other beads that we've added previously to kind of just get the right angle. And from there, we then need to grab hold of the bead and then continue pushing the wire to get that shape in place so we can create the wave effect with the other lengths. And once you have that in place, we need to just take one length of our wires at a time here that we're creating the effect with. So again, I'm taking the one furthest away from the new bead that we just added, and make sure they're nice and smoothed out. This time they're coming from underneath the base wire, so I'm going to be bringing them over the top of the base wire on the other side of the bead. And then when you've got that nice curve in place and you're happy with how it's sitting, just wrap your wire around the same amount of times as you've done previously. And then you just want to continue using one wire at a time until we created the wave effect on this section. And you just keep repeating this until you have the length that you need, kind of moving from side to side, creating the waves. So now I've done the whole length here, you can see this beautiful wavy effect that we get. And you can also see the pattern itself is between the two lengths of wire coming out from a bead. It's pretty much 90 degrees, so that's also something you can use as a guide to know where to place your wires. But then we need to finish off the ends here, so I'm just going to show you on one because it's the same on both. So we have all our lengths of wires wrapped around that base wire, and I'm just going to do one at a time, and I want to just continue the wrap in the direction that it's going, coming over towards the other side there, just to kind of fill in that little gap that's in between the wraps, so like that. Then I'm going to go in and start cutting them off because we've already wrapped them around the base wire several times on their own, so they're nice and secure. Now the first one here I like to cut off a little bit more towards the outside of the piece, so cut off the excess like that, and the rest I'm going to cut off more towards the inside, so there's just going to be a tiny little end left of the wire here that you'll be able to feel with your finger if you go over it. But I'm just going to go over and cut all of them off like that. So we've gotten rid of them now. And then I'm going to take my Tweezernose, and we then want to make sure we push the little ends down. So I'm going to place my pliers right on the end and then just gently roll my pliers in the direction the wrap is going. So that tucks the very end of the wire into the weave and gets it out of the way, so when we're wearing the bracelet it's not going to catch or scratch on any clothes or skin, and the ends get hidden nicely away. And also just make sure to flatten down that last one. So we've now gotten rid of all the ends of the 0.6mm. Then we have the end of our base wire, and this I'm also going to make a loop with, so we can of course attach our clasp. So I'm going to bring in my 6-step bell making pliers for this, all around those pliers if that's what you're using, and then I'm just going to choose one of the slightly larger steps and just place that on the base wire just after where the wraps are, and start to roll it down a bit, almost as if we were adding a bead, and kind of bend it back inwards and have it come down in that other direction. And then I'm going to start to bring the wire itself around the pliers to create a circle and have it overlap until we have something a bit like that. So you can see we have our full loop now, and because this is a thick base wire we're using, it makes it nice and strong, so doing an open loop like this is perfectly fine. So I'm just going to cut off the excess right where it starts to overlap itself further back, like that. And then all we can do is close it up, so it basically opens and closes like a jump ring does. And then we have a loop here where we can attach our findings. And of course you just want to go to the other end and finish off that one in exactly the same way. So now I've attached my clasp and extender chain, then all that's left to do is shape the bracelet. So I'm just going to go in and start putting a curve into it and just gradually move from side to side, adding slightly more and more of a curve. So you don't want to go into one place and just put a big bend into it that's going to put it out of shape, but just gradually go from side to side. And obviously the aim is to get the two ends closer together so we can use the clasp. Now you can shape it around something that has the size and shape you want it to have, like a bracelet mandrel. Also, I personally aim to make it more of an oval shape rather than a round. I feel that sits better on the wrist. But then once we have it in place and we can use the clasp, the bracelet is finished and ready to wear. So that's how you make these Eternal Waves Wirework Bracelets, and you can play around with different amounts of wires and wraps to achieve different looks. Now don't forget, these will be for sale in my shop. You can find them below the video. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for watching it, and I'll see you in the next one.